Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
This week, Agriculture Commissioner Thom Petersen talks about efforts to expand the agricultural economy, and Senator John Hoffman provides an update on nursing homes and elder care. Plus, lawmakers promote a new law that allows for second chances. Stay tuned for this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. This week, to bolster state employment in a competitive labor market, Governor Tim Walz signed an executive order removing the four-year degree requirement for more than 75% of state government jobs.
Whether it's on-the-job training, it's technical training, it's in the military, it's at previous jobs they've had, that there are many different paths to get to the point you're trying to go. Four-year degrees are one of those. They're an important part of it, but it is not the only way. And this executive order we're signing today is going to open up about 75% of state jobs that in many cases had a list of skill requirements, but also included a four-year degree was needed. That piece will be removed from it. The skills that will be there, people will be expected to be able to apply and then to use the knowledge that they've had to make them eligible for their state jobs. We think this is an incredible way to open up what we think is an incredible way to serve the state, but also good middle-class jobs that come with health benefits, retirement, and the things you can do to help your neighbors in the state of Minnesota.
Not only do we want to help more Minnesotans find good paying jobs, but we're also investing in training for high demand jobs like technology, trades, caring professions, manufacturing, and education through our Drive for Five program. Our Black, Indigenous, and communities of color of Minnesotans from those communities have faced unjust and discriminatory barriers to employment through our targeted population workforce programs and on-the-job training in nursing, management, and entrepreneurship. So whether you're looking for your first job or a new experience, we want you in Minnesota.
Minnesota has seen 7 straight months of labor force growth. This is great news for employers looking to hire, and there are a lot of them. And government is one such group. More Minnesotans are getting off the sidelines and looking for jobs, but we know there is a huge untapped labor force who could look for jobs if we provided the right paths for them to do so. And one of those paths is dropping educational requirements for jobs that don't need it. Many in-demand positions inside government and out can be completed with certificates and on-the-job training. So to improve recruitment and retention and to help Minnesotans secure employment, we need to tear down every barrier between jobs like these and Minnesotans who could fill them.
According to the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry, Minnesota's agricultural production is valued at $21.3 billion, 7th in the United States. Also noteworthy are agricultural exports of $9.3 billion and over $106 billion annually in total economic impact that supports nearly 400,000 jobs. Joining me to talk about the state of Minnesota's agriculture industry is Thom Petersen, the Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture. Thank you for being here.
Great to be here.
2023 is the third year now that Minnesota has experienced drought conditions. Avian influenza popped up in Meeker County most recently. There were other outbreaks during the spring. Generally speaking, how are farmers and food producers faring right now?
You know, it's such an important time right now as we're trying to wrap up harvest. This week we had snow and rain, and it closed things down. In general, we're in pretty good shape for our harvest conditions. We're almost have all of our soybeans harvested. We're about 80% on our corn. And yields are coming in better than we thought they would in the drought areas. For having that drought, again, as you said, that we've experienced for many farmers, this is their third year. I'd say the hardest hit the impacted our cattle farmers who lost that summer pasture. They lost a lot of hay and forage where some of the other crops came back or had decent yields across the state, does impact our cattle industry quite a bit. And then, as you mentioned, unfortunately, we've had quite an outbreak of high-path avian influenza this fall. We're up over 10 cases, which we didn't have any for a while, and now they're hitting kind of hard. And so our producers take a lot of that biosecurity. We always want to remind people chicken, poultry, turkey is safe to eat. A lot of precautions taken there. But it's a trying time, as you say. You got to always be prepared as a farmer.
The budget surplus available to lawmakers as they crafted the 2023 budget meant that all budget areas, including agriculture, received one-time increases in funding. This resulted in an increase in the Department of Ag's Emerging Farmers Initiative. How much will this investment help diversify both in terms of age and ethnicity Minnesota's food growers?
You know, it really is great investments that we see, not just in the Emerging Farmers Office, but we see things that are investments in farm to school. Lieutenant Governor Flanagan and I were at the Hutchinson Public Schools yesterday to see what they're doing and buying from those emerging farmers. So being able to create an emerging farmers office in Minnesota is a unique thing across the country, because we look at the demographics in Minnesota are changing rapidly. We have a large Somali, Hmong, Latino populations, and they want to farm. And so up until now in the ag census, the average farmer in Minnesota looks pretty much like me, mid-50s, white male. And we want to help those people too, but we want to really encourage that next generation to fit those marketplaces. And so we're putting in resources, sometimes it's translation services, grants, access to programs that will help those folks come along. And so we're really excited about that opportunity.
An opinion by Carl Casale in the Star Tribune in August was titled, "Women Are the Future of Agriculture." He notes that while historically women have been viewed in supporting or novelty roles, now 1/3 of Minnesota Farm's primary operators are women. Are women increasingly interested in agriculture?
Yeah, I'd say that's always been the way, and I'd say like even more and more we see that decision making. We see, especially whether it's in the local food movements, technology. I visit a lot of farms, and it's really interesting to see the role that women play. One thing is we just didn't recognize the contributions that women use. The USDA, when we didn't even ask that question on the census till a few years ago, and so I think just counting it, recognizing it, but it is very exciting to see a lot of the different ingenuity and things that women are bringing to agriculture. It's very exciting.
The Department of Agriculture's 18th Emerging Farmers Conference will be held this weekend, and it's not only geared to women farmers, but also Indigenous, New American, and BIPOC people. I checked the website, and registration is now closed due to overwhelming interest. So for people who may be interested in next year's Emerging Farmers Conference, what do they learn?
Shannon, this is one of the best things. Being an ag commissioner is great, and you get to do a lot of neat things. But this is one of the best conferences or things that I go to every year. The people at the Emerging Farmers Conference, they just want to learn. They want to network. They're so enthusiastic, and so that's what One thing I'd say is learning from other people is whether you're an emerging farmer or you're somebody like myself. That's how you get done. So connecting those dots. But the translation, we see, I think it's translated into 8 different languages, and just to see that going on. The first time I attended, it was very jumbled to me, but then I realized about halfway through it what was really going on, where we had people and we were getting the information. But I can just tell you the enthusiasm there is infectious, and it's exciting to see who wants to farm in Minnesota.
The legislature used money from the surplus to establish a grain indemnity fund. According to a Minnesota Public Radio report, Minnesota has averaged 1 grain elevator failure per year since 2015. And as I understand it, this new fund will reimburse farmers if they have sold their grain to an elevator that subsequently goes out of business. The law also included a provision to study regulation and financial oversight. Does this indemnity fund prompt riskier business dealings in the future? And is there still more that the legislature needs to do in order to make this thing work well?
Yeah, the indemnity fund was really important as we continued to see failures, and even as myself as commissioner, and nothing happening. So farmers, the current system we had was a bonding system that paid farmers or supported them pennies on the dollar. And, continuing to see farmers have, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars in losses who thought they were protected was not working. And so we put the indemnity fund together. We hope to cover more of those losses. We still do have some work to do. I think one of the things we've also put in some other protections in place, whether that's education, working with auditing, board of directors. I've been on nonprofits and you glaze over sometimes when you do the audit reports. You got to pay attention to those. You got to look for those pieces and that. And I think the failures that we've had have put a lot of co-ops and businesses on notice that you have to pay attention. Sometimes it's a manager who knows everything and then has a health problem, and or we have fraud. And so I think this is an interesting new law. Most of the states around us already had an indemnity fund, so we modeled it after that. But we still do have a couple of I's to dot and T's to cross.
But generally speaking, more security for farmers going forward.
This will provide more security for farmers and just to prevent bankruptcies, at no fault of their own.
Governor Walz is preparing to lead a trade delegation to Australia later this month. You have traveled on missions like these to the Philippines and the United Kingdom. Deputy Commissioner Andrea Vogel went to Japan recently. From the perspective of the leader of the state's agriculture agency, what is the value of these trips?
Well, Minnesota is an agricultural powerhouse. We're known around the world. If you look at the companies and co-ops that we're home to here, whether it's CHS, Cargill, General Mills, Land O'Lakes, Jennie-O, we are a global state. And I wasn't necessarily a feed the world type of person when I became commissioner, but when you travel and you see that a lot of the world doesn't produce the food that they need and that they want, and so Minnesota does. And so I'm always excited to see the people that are excited to meet with us. A lot of times they don't, it's a lot about relationships. Trade's a lot about relationships, and it may not come right away. It might come 2 years from now. We visited Colombia, Finland, England, the Philippines. Those trips still pay dividends in those relationships to us. So incredibly, I'm excited even in Australia. We continue to have people reach out to us, even though our itinerary is almost set, saying, can we sneak in one more meeting? We want to show you something. We want to do business in Minnesota. So they play an incredible value to our state.
Commissioner Thom Petersen, it is always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Sponsors of Minnesota's 2023 Clean Slate Act called a press conference to highlight the new law.
And this bill is based on a really simple premise, which is that everybody deserves a second chance. Everybody deserves an opportunity for redemption. And we know that far too many individuals who have had a criminal history are struggling with getting access to housing, with getting access to jobs, with so much more of the barriers that are put up by having this criminal record. So the Clean Slate Act will automatically expunge certain records for certain crimes after a crime-free waiting period.
This is a Minnesota issue. If you think in terms of the need across our state, you see our neighbors, you see our friends, and you see our family members. And we, as a legislature, have been responsive to the ever-growing need because we, as a collective whole, want to continue to move us forward.
But part of public safety is saying that after you've done your time, after you've made rehabilitative efforts, after you've demonstrated that you deserve that chance, then it should be given. And it's not given lightly. There is a process. And I might add that expunging a record is sealing it. There are still records. They're just not in a space where landlords and employers and people like that who might deny an opportunity based on that. So I don't want anybody to think that we're not being serious about keeping people safe. We believe that this helps people remain safe and serves a safe community, because we believe that if you lock people out of opportunity, you leave them with no opportunities other than those that are extremely limited.
As we continue to grapple with the extraordinarily tight labor market, that need is more important than ever. And we believe this new law will help provide a pathway for workers to fill this void. If the Attorney General said this is the right thing to do, I want to be really clear, he's right. It's also a jobs bill. This is a jobs bill.
I am a justice-impacted individual, returning citizen, and I think it's one of the greatest efforts that any person who's taken accountability for their lives can participate in. The actual ability to be able to create social and economical mobility for you and your family is one of the greatest things that we can do in this landscape. Restoration is the optimal goal, to see each and every person have equity and inclusion invested into their own lives.
As a juvenile, I was in an abusive relationship that pretty much changed the course of my life, and it trickled into my adulthood. And so as a result, I have lingering charges from when I was 18 years old that are over 10 years old that will go away in 2025. And as the co-director of the Until We All Free movement, we are partnering with Tone Up, Isaiah, and other community organizations to make sure that all of our communities are aware of this transformational law, and making sure that we're implementing it, making sure everyone in our communities know that this is going to happen, that they can go get that job that they haven't been applying for decades.
As temperatures drop and the snow begins to fly, lawmakers are beginning preparations for the 2024 non-budget legislative session. Joining me to talk about some of the challenges facing the state's long-term care industry, its aging population, and people who may be falling through the cracks is the chair of the Senate Human Services Committee, Senator John Hoffman. Thank you for being here.
Shannon, it's great to be back. I was jokingly saying it must be a slow day in Minnesota because the snow hits and there we go. But it's good to be back. Thank you for having me.
Here. Last session, the logjam over a bonding bill broke free in the 11th hour with an agreement to provide $300 million in additional emergency funding over 4 years for nursing homes. Presumably, some of that money has now found its way to where it's needed. To your knowledge, is it helping nursing homes with the myriad problems that they have been facing?
First of all, I want to talk about that, the end of session. I said we need $3.2 billion to try to solidify the caregivers, world in order to move things forward. And having that extra $300 million got us to $3.25 billion. So it was where it was. It was beautifully orchestrated. It was well done. And I got to tell you, it became a bipartisan conversation at the end. And to see that, I was full of joy. And then when we went in and negotiated about how that money would be laid out, because I'll get to that point, we specifically picked Erin May Quaid and Jordan Rasmussen to lead that mediated conversation with everybody at the table. And Representative Neuer and I sat with Representative Schumacher, and we were just helping facilitate. But they actually did it. So it was a nonpartisan, bipartisan piece. I wish cameras would have been in there showing how that conversation went because it was well done. And at the end, of course, it was 67-0, on that, which then got to where it needs. And nursing homes are grateful, right? They're saying now they can start to do things like debt restructure, paying off covenants, the avoiding receivership. There's some debt payments that were needed. They can close some lines of credit. And we had given a different package this year that's ever been done in the past, and that just helped really boost that up. So, and ultimately the commissioner, there's other areas, if you find that there's a need, you can get approval from the commissioner when it comes to it. But yeah, some of them are already using it. The first payment that went out was August 1st, right? That was $173 million. And the next one will come out again August 1st of 2024.
So having the intended effect.
Yeah. We still need to do a couple of things, though. I mean, when you look at, there's still reimbursement costs, this whole value-based reimbursement thing. I don't like how that system is set up because it's 21 months, so you're waiting in your arrears in order to get payment. And that really caused the dilemma this past year because we had two things happen. This great inflation that occurred, hyperinflation, and then we had this great resignation. Everybody started to resign at the end of the pandemic, which left these guys kind of out there in the middle of nowhere. And so I think we need to come back, and we'll talk about that later on, about what are we going to do next year.
Yes, we will talk about that. But you also just led right into my next question, because human services is a labor-intensive field. And you mentioned inflationary pressures, and you also mentioned a shortage of workers. Yeah. Regardless, it takes people to take care of people. So Is this a solvable problem with the workforce issues and inflation and the cost of caring for people?
You know, when you're talking about personal cares, right, and we're looking at the caregiver bucket, there's still 53,000 job openings. And even though we elevated the pay structure to them beginning in January, you're going to start to see, hopefully we'll start to see some changes on that. The reimbursement rates were terrible. For 10 years, we did nothing for elderly waivered services. The reimbursement rate was still $13.61 or $13.91. If I'm out by 30 cents, it doesn't matter. The point is, you could have got a job at McDonald's in Burnsville at $21 an hour versus helping somebody that truly needs it, right? And then you say, all right, well, what are we doing on the housing side to do intergenerational housing? Years ago we had these tiny home pods that were something that was available. The cities hated it. They actually, most of them voted not to have them. Okay, well, let's have that conversation again to say, how do you make it intergenerational, maybe at a tiny home that's in the driveway or in the backyard, grandpa and grandma are there, or whoever that needs that help could be there, right? The other thing I think it leads to looking at, because if we don't get the feds to open up, the immigration status, you could have more people come to Minnesota. We could have jobs for them like the very next day. Our unemployment rate's the lowest in the nation, right? And when you look at these service industry ones, there's a deep need there. But then that leads to another one. Well, maybe we need to look at some other alternatives when it comes to caring for grandpa and grandma or caring for somebody who has a disability. The personal care side of it, if I need assistance getting in and out of a bed, that's one thing. But if I need to be tracking what my PDMs are or what my blood flow or my glucose, all that stuff, you can actually have that done. And there's a multi-interaction media that's available out there. There's an organization, the guy who started Minute Clinics from Minnesota, actually Healthy Med is an organization out there that you got a TV in your room, but it's not just a TV, but it's multi-dimensional interaction. So you have a nurse who's able to know, oh, your blood pressure's up. Hey, Jimmy, and a sign will go up on the TV because most people are watching TV, right? Check your meds, right? I mean, stuff like that. Those kinds of conversations I think need to happen that lead us in there because, yeah, we're not going to just fill it with people because it's 53,000 job openings, right?
So technology may play a role.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a few weeks ago on this program, Governor Walz highlighted the fact that Minnesota does well at keeping older Minnesotans in their homes. At a recent meeting of the Legislative Task Force on Aging, which was a group established by the legislature last session, Maureen Schneider of the Minnesota Board on Aging was talking about skewed housing stock. In particular, she said that in rural areas, there are widows who live in large homes that struggle to pay for utilities or taxes or the upkeep of the home. Meanwhile, in those same rural areas, there's not enough housing stock for families seeking to just, live and work. Does the state need to rethink aging in place when there's these pressures of one person in a large home and families needing housing?
I think the real issue that exists out there, we know aging in place not only makes sense, but it's less costly on the system. And when you look at our generation of folks older than us, 65 and older, has increased at a higher rate than those that are in K-12 education. When you look at the numbers are absolutely skewed. Here's E12, 65 and older here. The cost on medical assistance, because our baby boomers didn't necessarily save all their money, right? There isn't money at the end of their life. I don't know what happened there, but you're starting to see a lot of that saying elderly waivered services come in. So the cost goes from $1 billion, Minnesota $1 billion, to $3 billion just to cover 65 and older in the medical assistance side of it, right? I might be off by a couple $100 million in there, but the fact remains that there's a deep need there, right? So then when you start to say, it makes more sense to have folks in home, it does. Where's the employees to be able to do that? That's an issue, right? So what else can be set up? That whole conversation can be there. I've heard that skewed conversation, but it then comes back to where's the deep needed affordable housing that exists and what makes sense for somebody at the end of the day. I want to stay in my house as long as I can. I do. Because it's got all my stuff, all my tchotchkes from years that it still have my bowling balls that are 40 years old that I'm never going to bowl again, but I used to be a really good bowler. I have my 4 drum sets set up. I don't want to lose that stuff, right? Even when I'm 80, I still want to be in. I want to go down and I want to set up my 1986 Gretsch kit and I want to play it, right? That makes sense to me. And so how does the system then respond to what makes sense to that? And I think that I'm glad to hear that group met, and I'm glad that those conversations are coming out.
Before we go, what big challenges do you see on the horizon, and would you provide perhaps a preview of one or two things that the Senate Human Services Committee will be pursuing for sure in the 2024 legislative session?
So we still have to deal with competitive workforce factor, right? We edged that up a little bit, but we didn't really fix it all. There's still a gap that exists when we did the MAEPD spend down provision. We did the asset limitation side of it. We didn't do the spend down provision. People with disabilities are still treated differently than you don't have a disability when it comes to getting the services that are needed on the MA side of it, right? One of the things that we did well was that, getting rid of the parental fee was good. But I think next year we're looking at that and some housing 144G stuff, and it's going to be a full agenda next year.
Okay. Senator John Hoffman, thank you. It's always a pleasure.
It's always good talking to you.
As the Metropolitan Governance Task Force considers options to reform the Met Council, members considered the governance system of the Portland, Oregon region.
This is going to be the first in a series where we have taken some input from members of the public and members of the committee around different models of governance from around the country. And I think this is going to be very important to our work moving forward. We have a lot of options that we want to discuss and get more information on so that we can move forward with a possible set of recommendations coming out of this task force to the broader legislature. That is our charge. Models that we are most familiar with that I think we really want to get additional detail on, that is a council of governments. And of course, we have the model that many people have spoken of over the years coming out of Portland, which is direct election.
The original construct in 1979 was that there would be 13 counselors and an elected COO. And having worked at Metro back when this government structure 25 years ago was in place, it was nasty because the COO was elected, right, and thought that they had policy decision-making as well as the ability to run the agency. And the 13 electeds thought that they had policymaking, and it was nothing but loggerheads between the two. So in 1992, that was changed. The COO was no longer an elected position. It went to become an appointed by the council president with approval from the council itself. In the culture of the state of Oregon, the state is not the end-all be-all to the majority of our citizens. Their mayor is more important. And so that might be slightly different than, the lens that you're putting on from the state of Minnesota, but I just wanted to, it's extremely important to have grassroots up, not top down.
But there's no easy answer to this. And, models that we might like or have bias towards, or models that we don't like or have bias against, there's no one-size-fits-all. This is going to be a process where we have to take what we think works best here, and but I think your advice is well taken, that there's going to be tensions no matter what.
Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.